Hi, I'm Derek Ashong. Welcome to the stream. You are once again here in our pre-show. This is where we get an opportunity to talk about some of the issues of the day before we dive into the full broadcast on television. Remember that after the TV broadcast, you can rejoin us right here at stream.aljazeera.com for our post-show where we get a chance to dive deeper into some of the issues that have come up. Ahmed, Ramesh, great to see you guys. Absolutely. So a lot of things are going on, and actually we might as well jump right in with what Ahmed has brought up on his screen. Germany has effectively decided that they are going to shut down all of their nuclear power plants by 2022. This is obviously partially in response to what happened in Fukushima. So what do you guys think about that?
It's a major step. I'm wondering how they were able to build the political consensus and the popular consensus.
They were waffling. I don't know if they've quite built it yet, but I'll tell you an anecdote. My dad's a nuclear physicist, and so he's across these issues. So when the tsunami happened,
you can't just say stuff like that. Like, oh, my dad's a nuclear physicist, and so
this is why I'm authoritative. No, I'm not. But I remember I was challenging him.
Exactly right.
I was challenging him because he worked for the IAEA. Like in all seriousness, and I told him, do you think that there's going to be a shift where people are going to start to abandon nuclear programs, which in the Arab world even, there's a lot of like new negotiations between French companies like Arriva trying to build these things. And he said, no, Germany just overreacted. No one's going to abandon nuclear programs. But it seems like, they're deliberately doing it in stages, it seems.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting, the whole question of energy right now. Like, because on the one hand, people say, well, nuclear, back in the 70s and 80s, after the Chernobyl disaster in Ukraine, after the 3 Mile Island disaster in the United States, a lot of people were like, this is dirty energy, it's dangerous. In the U.S., they definitely shut it down. But, or at least you didn't have new nuclear power plants being built. The interesting thing now is nuclear is being promoted as a potential clean energy solution because
relative to oil and
relative to fossil fuels.
Sure.
So I think it's really intriguing to see, well, how do you get around this question of all the energy needs that the world wants, but doing it in a way that the world can sustain?
Absolutely. And how do you build the political capital to try to make something happen in terms of choosing one energy source over another, or kind of developing legislation?
Exactly.
We always talk about protests and stuff, right?
Yeah.
But it's apparently tens of thousands of people. In this Al Jazeera article, it says, have been demonstrating against nuclear energy all week in Germany, and we haven't even covered that on our show.
Yeah, we haven't touched that. We missed the protest.
Right. How could we?
I know.
There's a big question about whether this kind of, these sorts of steps that are happening in Germany would translate to neighboring countries in Europe, or could translate at all to the United States or North America.
I think that part of the big question for me is it going to translate into greater investment in pursuing other clean energy options and seeing if they're viable and what happens. There was an interesting, I heard Prince Walid from Saudi Arabia said on another network yesterday, basically that that the Saudi government would love for oil prices to be around $70 to $80 per barrel.
Fix them.
Yeah, because if you have it at that rate rather than above 100, once you start creeping above 100, you start giving countries like the United States greater incentive to pursue clean energy technologies. But once it's 70 to 80, everyone's sort of complacent, like, it's okay, we'll buy some more gas, we'll keep the oil flowing. Yeah. And the question to me, the thing that I think is interesting to see what comes out of this German move is whether or not they were going to invest in new technologies, or are they going to be like, we just want more oil?
Right. Yeah. Right. What's the alternative?
Exactly.
What's the alternative?
Proponents of solar and wind and alternative energies are obviously really excited by this development. But you asked about France and if people are going to follow in suit.
Yeah.
Just quickly, we see that France is actually coming down really hard on Germany. We have the French industrial minister saying Germany will become even more dependent on fossil fuels and imports, and electricity is going to become more expensive. They're going to be polluting more.
Yeah.
So there's an argument that nuclear is less of a pollutant as long as it's safe. So.
And one of the big questions that translates to what we're interested in is how does sort of the news of what happened in Japan spread, maybe via social media or some other way to a social movement in another country far away in another part of the world.
And the Japanese haven't really had a chance to figure out how they want to respond to this whole thing because they're still dealing with the crisis.
Exactly.
I want to, speaking of political capital and how people influence politics, I want to see if our Skype guest can hear us. Andre, are you there?
I am, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time to explain Boat Compass to us.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we're going to just finish this pre-show, and then we're going to jump right into the conversation about Boat Compass, so we'll bring you in and ask you a few questions. Thanks a bunch.
Perfect.
Okay, talk to you shortly. So what he's doing is phenomenal, and we're going to get a little deeper into how technology influences people's ability to not only understand their role and their place in a democratic system, but also what their influence is and what their predilections might be, what they believe and what they think they believe. So I think that's going to be fascinating.
Yeah. Yep.
We also have our producer in the control room, Andrew, is actually going to be talking. You can see him right there. Andrew, wave to the people. There you go. And so Andrew is going to be checking out Vote Compass. It's actually a tool that enables people to answer a survey of 30 questions and actually learn if what they believe is their political leaning is actually what it is. And not only that, but it also gives them some insight into what parties, what candidates are actually going to reflect their interests.
For people who might not be accustomed
before
to
you
policies.
finish, just so we let the folks know, Andrew's going to we got 10 people in Turkey taking a Vote Compass test right now.
As we speak.
We speak. So we're going to come back and get their results during the show. But go ahead, Ahmed.
No, I was just going to say, it's basically trying to match your views on like social issues, economic issues, and political issues. Because this is the whole debate of the show, right? Like, do these actually reflect a person's opinions, or is it because we live in these kind of closed virtual worlds where we only have access to information that, my friend might tend to agree with me. So,
it would be actually interesting if the results of this could be compared with people's friends who takes the Vote Compass, or even the credibility of candidates that they select or that they're mapped to, whether that candidate is capable of delivering the message, the platform that's mapped to their Vote Compass survey.
Yeah, that is actually a really interesting question, because ultimately that's the issue. People vote all the time and complain that they don't get what they want from the candidate. Who knows? Are you actually voting from the candidate that is going to do what you want, or they're just the candidate that's going to say what you want to hear?
Or what your friend wants.
Exactly. So we're going to come back to that in a sec, but you guys, this is going to be good. We're going to get ready for the broadcast. Folks, we are going to go live in about 30 seconds, so stay tuned. We're talking about democracy today and some very interesting aspects of how technology influences it. We'll see you on the air. Hi, I'm Derek Ashong, and you are now in The Stream, a social media community with its own daily TV show. As always, we are bringing you the stories that are ongoing, global, and sourced from social media. Today, people around the world are protesting, demanding reform. But will the choices they make at the ballot box be in their best interests? And how do you rise above political rhetoric to find real solutions? Our digital producer, Ahmed Shihab Eldin, is back from Toronto, joining us here on the couch. Also with us is Ramesh Srinivasan. He is an assistant professor in information studies and design at UCLA, studying the impact of social media in a variety of contexts. I know you've worked with bloggers who have actually helped to create regime change in their own countries. Tell us a little bit about that, Ramesh.
Yeah, so this is work that my colleague Adam Fish and I did before in a country called Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia. And this is a country where under 5% of people in this country actually have access to the internet. So one would think, given like what Malcolm Gladwell wrote in the New Yorker last year, why would the internet matter at all? Why would social media matter at all in this political movement? And what we found out was the people who led the movement had to develop a mission, and they had to develop those missions separate from one another, because if they all met in the same place, they would be gunned down. So they used their strong ties via social media to actually generate the type of mission that they then translated into megaphones, fax machines, posters on walls.
So this is fascinating, because what basically Gladwell is a very well-known writer, and he said that weak ties of social media, how can you make real change and you just having relationships online? And what you're saying is these people actually built strong relationships. They just used social media as tools to advance their broader interests. And we're seeing that around the world. Definitely interested in your thoughts on some of the stuff we get into today.
Yeah.
Ahmed, you've been looking at what people have been saying to us in the stream over the weekend. What kind of stuff have we heard?
Well, we have news coming out of France from Love Social. It was originally tweeted from Alex Toole, and he's saying, so in France, TV news are not allowed to say Facebook or Twitter anymore. So what does this actually mean?
No.
It seems there's a somewhat strange kind of ruling by the High Commission for Audio and Video in France, which goes by CSA, and they've decreed that any reference to a Facebook page or to a Twitter page, as you can see in this article, is essentially can be classified as subliminal advertising and therefore is illegal. So this all stems from a 1992 law which says you can't, that's against subliminal advertising, which would make our show, if we were to broadcast in France, impossible.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I mean, what do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of silly, and it's very much. These terms are actually so much part of our everyday language. The key is for us to use those terms and be conscious of what they mean.
Yeah.
How do we use terms like Facebook? How do we use terms like Twitter?
Yeah, and I
rather
think what
than
they're
ban
saying,
them?
it's
right?
almost like, if you show a Facebook page, then that's subliminal advertising for that page. But you've got to help your viewer to be sophisticated enough to realize that, we should be talking about the different sources. I mean, does that mean they can't mention newspapers either?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. LinkedIn, Google, I mean, everything's social networking these days. But essentially they're saying use the term social network instead of Facebook or Twitter. So don't be specific. But in other news, in another social network, I won't name which one, Revolutions Info is sending us, on a serious note, some video that's coming out of Morocco. And this is a story that we covered last week. Essentially what's happening is there seems to be a zero-tolerance policy, as you can see, where the police are starting to crack down quite hard on protesters. This is in Casablanca, where there are reports of police motorcycles and kind of motorcades cruising through the main roads and back streets of, right here, as you can see, beating a protester in a lower-income neighborhood called Sabata. And so they're trying to disperse the demonstrators and scatter any attempts by protesters to congregate.
That looks like a kid that they're beating. I mean, he looks very young.
Yeah, quite
right
young. And you can see, I mean, this video goes on. I'm going to stop it right here. But the power of these visual tools are really important to highlight. And so if you're at home, if you happen to have some footage on videotape or on photos and you want to share it with us, you can share it on our website. Or remember, you can always tweet us at AJStream.
Hi, I'm Salim Khan. I'm a journalist focused on innovation and news, and I'm in the stream.
Protesters in countries as diverse as Spain, Uganda, and the UK have been calling for change. But what kind of change do they want? And can technology help them figure it out? This is a story. As you can see from my screen, this is actually an image of a number of Turkish flags because we're talking about a technology that's actually being deployed in Turkey right now. Now, mind you, this is not a new tool. It's called Vote Compass, and it's actually been used in, I think, 30 different countries at this point, whereby they use a kind of survey in order to determine a person's particular predilections and interests. So, as you can see from my screen, it's an online tool that allows users to find a party which most closely matches their own political social interests. So here's an example of a question in the survey. If you look at my screen, it says social programs should be maintained even at the cost of higher taxes. It gives you a series of options. You can say whether you completely agree, whether you tend to agree, whether you're neutral or tend to disagree, or completely disagree. Now, mind you, depending upon how you answer these questions, a series of 30 questions, it will help you to create a profile of this is where your interests lie. So you might go into using a tool like Vote Compass and say, oh, well, I'm like a liberal progressive.
Right.
And then you might come out of it and be like, well, actually, I'm an economic conservative or fiscal conservative, right? So this is something that we want to dive a little bit deeper into. And joining us now via Skype from Belgrade is Andre Kroll. He's the founder of Kies Compass or Vote Compass. Andre, you have done this project in more than 30 countries at this point. Talk to us a little bit about what inspired you to create Vote Compass and what impact you think it's having.
Well, there was actually a similar tool already in the Netherlands where I'm from, which I thought was very bad because it only had yes or no, and it couldn't distinguish between parties that are very centrist in the Netherlands. And so as a joke, I made a new tool, which I thought was better, which had two differences, namely what you just showed, 5 answer categories, and it put you in a landscape, the local political landscape, this national political landscape. And that joke went totally out of hand because 3.4 million people out of 12 million voters went to my website. Wow. And then, of course, as a political scientist, I immediately saw that this was an enormous, interesting source to get into the heads of voters and see how they actually decide to vote for a certain party. And then I decided to take that further and make it into a public information tool to inform voters about where parties exactly stand, and also to force parties to become more accountable. Because what we do is we take important issues, we position parties, and then we send it to them and say, so is this your position or is it not? And if it's not, tell us.
Well, so now, what is the impact of this tool? And is there a danger or a possibility that it could actually skew or change the results of elections?
Well, from the scarce evidence that we have, because it's quite new, it's like 5-6 years old, but in the first results we now see academically, there's quite an effect in Western democracies. In the Netherlands, we found that 14% of all voters used the tool, and it determined partly their final party choice. So yes, it has an impact, which also means we have to be very careful that the tool is very good, totally transparent, so you can press on click on every party, and you will see all their placements. So there's no black box. The tool is totally transparent, and that's what we are working towards. But yes, it has an impact because people take the advice seriously.
Okay. Now, I hear we're getting some comments online already. So, Ahmed, what are people saying so far?
Yeah, I'm not completely sure if this user on Twitter has used this tool, but she's saying that, these kinds of applications simplify complex issues into a simple question or to a series of questions. So should we really trust these kind of oversimplified questions she's asking more than our minds?
Can I answer that?
Yes, please.
Because it's not a simple question. We make the question simple, but if you then go to the answers, you can click on the parties, and we link through to their party platform, to what they say to voters that they will do. So it's not a simple tool. It guides people to documents that parties write that they normally would never read, because it's like 60 to 100 pages, totally boring text. But we have selected salient issues. We have placed the parties on that issue, showing their differences. And by a simple click, you can see what these parties are going to do for you on that important issue. So it's not at all simplistic.
Right.
Okay, Now before we go on, we have some more questions for you, Andre, but before we go on, we did have a chance to speak with Nu Yilmaz, who's a commentator on Turkish media and politics, and we got his actual Vote Compass results, and I want to show them, and I want to get some of your impressions, Ramesh, and we're going to come back to you, Andre. Here we go.
Yes, it is surprising because, first of all, I did not think I would be on the right portion of the whole diagram regarding socioeconomic rights. So in terms of progressive, it's a little bit higher than my expectation as well. So other than that, I think in general, yes, because it reminds me that we need to really rethink as Turkish citizens about policy issues rather than politics. But it's all about normalization in Turkish politics. So once we have normal political system, then I think these kind of policy issues will make more sense.
Okay, so there you have an example of a political commentator saying that, a relatively politically sophisticated person saying that his perspective, what he thought he believed, was actually different from when he took the test. Ramesh, what are the implications of that, of people thinking they stand in one place and learning they stand somewhere else?
So what you have to understand with tools like this is they map specific individuals to stated policy platforms according to political parties. But a lot of the time people vote based upon their sense of compatibility with the specific candidate, the credibility of a particular candidate, and sometimes some issues matter more than others for people. I mean, it may not be a wedge issue, but it might be just some issues that matter more. Like, for example, I care more about abortion rights than I do about foreign policy, right? So all these elements dictate and impact voting. So the question is whether tools can be built, or whether more generally the type of democratic technology or not atmosphere can be created where people can actually participate in voting to understand these issues with context, with depth.
So speaking of participation, before we come back to Andre, we actually had asked at the beginning of during our pre-show, a number of our Twitter users in Turkey to take the test, and we got some feedback from them. So what have we seen so far, Andre?
Yeah, Nu is not, you're laughing, Andre, right there, which I'm going to get to that in a second, but we have from Aisha Yildirim, who took the Vote Compass test. She said, just got my results. As a political scientist, I found it quite surprisingly informative on where I'm standing. So again, she put a plus sign, which is suggesting that she was surprised. We have one more tweet we'll share with you, where someone is saying, Shun Bamesai said, I believe if such tools are put to place, based on the concept of objectivity and neutrality, it'll help voters. So he's emphasizing neutrality and transparency.
Okay, so we're hearing a lot of people are responding very well to this, Andre. I want to look at some of the challenging side, though, because you're obviously getting a lot of good and sensitive information on voter predilections and patterns. What happens to all the data that you collect, and who has access to it?
Well, very easily. We analyze the data during the campaign, so when a debate is on, we can actually track day by day. It's sort of a rolling poll. We can see if voters like certain leaders more or less. And we report that to media. So we cooperate with national media, newspapers, television, radio programs, and we tell them what we see in the data to start a debate about issues, where parties stand, what their differences are, whether voters for a certain party actually like the issue positions of that party. And so we put that into the, I would say, traditional media, if I can be so blunt about television.
So you release it to the media, but you don't release it necessarily directly to a given party?
Of course not. We never, ever share the data with a political party. They can just forget that.
Okay, well, we're glad that you're taking a strong stance, Andre. We've got to go to our next segment. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to explain this to us, and we're going to watch the results in Turkey and see how Voter Compass actually has an impact in this election. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. And remember, if you want to share your stories with us, tweet us at AJStream. We always rely on you, our online community, to help keep us informed.
Hi, my name is Ruzbeh Rakhni. I'm an Iranian web developer living in Toronto, and I'm in the stream.
For some, social media helps them to find a political identity. For others, it simply reinforces their existing beliefs. As users rely more and more on their Facebook and Twitter friends for news and information, are they cutting themselves off from new ideas? And does that make them more vulnerable to political gamesmanship? Things like Voter Compass are fascinating to me in that they help us to realize what we think we believe in may not be what we actually believe. Right. And you see a trend where people around the world will oftentimes vote for a party or vote for a cause or a campaign that might not actually reflect their own self-interest. One of the things that's happening now is because so many people are winding up in these, these newly walled gardens, I would say, these personal walled gardens where I am friends with Ahmed and I'm friends with Ramesh, and, we all think this certain way, so we send each other articles, et cetera, et cetera.
That's right.
But maybe we don't hear arguments from the other side. Is there a possibility that our social media is actually undermining the fabric of our societies if we're not exchanging ideas with people who don't already
Derek,
agree?
Generally speaking, the data on internet use shows that we tend to look at people who are very similar to us. We tend to look at our own camps, our own silos, some even call it our own ghettos of information. And it's really a democratic responsibility, whether it's a technology or a policy or a cultural platform, to try to build spaces for multiple opinions, multiple perspectives, multiple contexts and conversations.
It used to be that journalists, and publishers would kind of set the stage and kind of were the arbiters of information. Now it's automated, search engines, kind of limiting our scope.
Yeah, well, I want to get deeper into that issue, and we've got joining us two cool people right now to give some more insight. Via Skype, we've got Eli Pariser, an online organizer and co-founder of Avaz, a global web movement focusing on people-powered politics. He's also the author of The Filter Bubble and a founder of MoveOn.org, which is a political website and mailing list here in the United States. Also joining us from New York is Tara Dowdell, a Democratic political and business strategist. Eli and Tara, welcome both of you to the stream.
Thank you.
Thank you, Derek.
So now, Eli, I want to jump in with you first. We're talking about this issue of how people find that they are getting information from folks who agree with them. And your book is talking about the potential dangers of the internet helping to drive us in directions that only reinforce our beliefs. But you're also a co-founder of projects like Move On and Avaz. Aren't they examples of what you're talking about?
Well, the difference that's going on online and in social media is that you're not choosing it. I think, for the history of media, we've chosen media that, tends to reflect what we believe. But at least when you turn on, in the U.S., when you turn on a partisan news channel like Fox or MSNBC, you know what the prism is through which you're viewing the world, and therefore you have a sense of what's being left out. And what's concerning about media like Facebook or like a lot of these other new personalized media is that you don't really have a sense.
I just want to let our viewers know your video is frozen, but we're still getting your audio clearly, so please continue.
Sorry about that. So, what's concerning about something like Facebook is that you don't really know how it's editing your view of the world. You don't know what's being edited out. And
just to clarify that, Eli, so basically what you're saying is that when you go to Facebook and let's say you click on a given article or a given link, it tells that, oh, wait, you like this sort of thing, so I'm going to show you links that are also reflective of this sort of thing, and you don't know what algorithm it's using to edit out. You don't know what you're actually missing in your Facebook feed. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. And I had this experience personally where I had sought out people who thought differently from me. I wanted to hear from people who had different political views. And when I logged onto Facebook one morning, they were gone. They had disappeared. Basically, Facebook had figured out that, well, you say you want to hear this from people who disagree with you, but actually, we're watching what you're doing. We can tell that you're not that interested. You would rather, hear from the people whose links you click more.
So I want to get Tara in on this point because, Tara, you are a Democratic strategist, but I know you've commented for conservative outlets, and even as Eli mentioned, Fox News, you've been a commentator with them for a while. What do you think about the nature of political discourse when people are able to go into a walled garden and hear from folks who basically agree with them?
Well, I think that's definitely a dangerous dynamic because what we see right now is people overwhelmingly going to media outlets looking for information that reinforces their worldview. And so that's why I do go on Vox, because I do want to offer an alternative to what people may be, what their preconceived notions are on a number of different issues. But I think it's definitely a dangerous pattern. I think a bigger issue is just the overall way our media approaches issues. Everything is either or. And there's not a lot of room in the middle. And that either or forces people to believe that, or not everyone, but it creates a dynamic where people start to believe it has to be this or it has to be that.
Tara, I want to jump on that very issue of either or because I want to give an example that people overseas may not know, but in the United States, this is a very, very famous political ad. It was from the 1988 presidential campaign between George H.W. Bush, first Bush, and Michael Dukakis, and I'll explain what it's all about in a second.
Bush and Dukakis on crime. Bush supports the death penalty for first-degree murderers. Dukakis not only opposes the death penalty, he allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison. One was Willie Horton, who murdered a boy in a robbery, stabbing him 19 times. Despite a life sentence, Horton received 10 weekend passes from prison. Horton fled, kidnapped a young couple, stabbing the man and repeatedly raping his girlfriend. Weekend prison passes. Dukakis on crime.
Now, this is a particular ad that became very well known because it was used as what a lot of people in the United States would call race baiting. They put this image in. You look at it, I'm like, wow, I don't want a guy like Willie Horton being around my family. But it also reinforces certain preconceived notions that black people are dangerous or scary or criminal. Now, the interesting thing about something like this is we found in the research we're doing for this show that the average working class white person will have done better economically, or at least there would have been a lower gap between the haves and have-nots during a Democratic administration than a Republican administration. Tara, what happens when somebody looks at this and says, I'm not going to vote based upon who is going to help me put food on the table. I'm going to vote based on the fact that I don't want this scary black guy to show up at my door?
Well, I think that, actually, Derek, I think that the majority of people vote based on their interest in a more pure way. But I do think there are enough people who would see this ad and allow this to dictate their decision. Because what the ad does is it takes into consideration what strategists have known for a long time. Fear is a powerful motivator. And so a lot of strategists understand that, and they understand that fear is even more of a powerful motivator in insecure economic times like now, what we see around the world.
Ramesh, talk to us a little bit about how this stuff plays on a global platform. I mean, how do politicians use these images or these fear points to manipulate voters?
Well, really the big issue, I think that both our guests are actually discussing here is the democratic question, which is how do we create policies or spaces or technologies that allow for conversation, right? Where people can come to that table with very differing positions, with controversies really, and be able to put their differences aside and actually understand that they're coming at things with very, very different positions And so we have yet to create a type of technology, including Wikipedia, in my opinion, that's actually been able to bridge those differences. And I think that's actually what Eli is saying, is this world of automation and filter bubbles are actually, actually circumscribing in many ways what we're actually going to receive. Even Google's algorithm could be seen in this way.
We're getting a lot of feedback online, but before we go to it, I do want to give Eli a chance to respond to that. Eli, you've heard what we're talking about. You've seen the examples. Like, any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think, yes, people vote in their interest, but the question is which interest, because we all have so many different things that we care about. And it's sort of one of the questions I have about Vote Compass is, if it's weighing all of those things equally, it's not really a good representation of how people actually think about the political world, which is that, we do have some things that we care, each of us has some things that we care about a lot more than others. Now, the extra wrinkle in this is that is actually very mutable, it's very changeable, and the way that it's changed is by media. When we're exposed to issues a lot in the media, there's a lot of evidence that shows that we tend to think that those issues are more important. So what we see actually affects how we think about our preferences, and that's why this sort of filter bubble phenomenon is so concerning to me in this context, because you sort of end up in a loop. What you are interested in dictates what you see. What you see dictates what you're interested in.
It's like it creates a feedback loop where the information keeps telling you certain things. And the problem that I'm interested in is that the information you get may not be accurate. I mean, just to give some more context to the ad that we just showed, if you have voters being scared that this guy is going to become a potential violent criminal, the statistics show that people are typically victims of crime from their own communities or people of their own race and ethnicity, but these still wind up being wedge issues.
Yeah, it's interesting because these are all the customization of the smart customization of the internet is obviously exploiting a lot of our cognitive blind spots, and that's what he's arguing. But this one tweet from Nicholas Slayton is kind of summing it up, saying, so ultimately it's once again up to the people to make sure they get a wide range of news and info, and that's where it gets tricky.
So what do you think about the responsibility of the citizen?
Well, that's right, except we see whether it's the cause of the technologies that we're participating in or just our culture, we see people not actually accessing a lot of information or perspectives or opinions that are outside of their own. So whether this is a question of politics, whether this is a question of technology development, better governance, or just our own personal, ethical, moral questions, we need to try to create worlds where we see that which is different than ourselves.
So I want to ask both of you, Eli and Tara, to stay with us into our post show. We're going to continue this conversation because people are talking so much about the Arab revolutions, Arab Spring, and the rise of democracy. I think it's worth considering, how do you make a democracy actually work? It's more than just a vote. Thanks all of you for joining us. You can see us now online at stream.aljazeera.com, where we'll be continuing the conversation. As always, you can also tweet us at AJStream. We hope you'll join us online and join the conversation. Hi, and welcome to the Post Show. We're going to be talking a little bit more about this issue of democracy. It goes beyond the vote. We've got some great people with us, and we're going to continue the conversation trying to understand a little bit about how some of this stuff works. So one of the things that I'm also thinking about was we look in this stuff, and I mentioned a little bit during at the end of last show, is this idea of, okay, well, how exactly do you find your interests? How do you vote your interests? How do you make sure that you realize that democracy is about more than just having the opportunity to vote, right?
That's
right. And Tara, I want to get some of your thoughts on this, because you are a political operative. You try to help people to, get elected based upon partisan perspectives, potentially. How do you think about this idea that a voter may respond to certain kinds of information, and how do politicians potentially use that to manipulate voter opinion?
Well, first, I'm not one of those consultants that engages in that kind of politics. I want to make that clear.
You're one of the good guys.
I'm one of the good guys, Derek. You know that.
No doubt.
But in all seriousness, I think that it's a difficult landscape, because there are a lot of politicians that subscribe to certain strategists that direct them to use certain buzzwords. I mean, what you see happening is, in any political campaign, there will be words that are poll tested to determine how people respond to that language, and ads created around those words. So to say, a perfect example here in the U.S. was, socialism. That is a huge buzzword here in this country, and it's exploited over and over again. Obama's a socialist. His policies are socialist. And so that dynamic absolutely exists. But I think what's important for what I do is we try to connect with people, connect emotionally, because that's a piece that people don't think about as much. But how something makes someone feel, how a politician makes someone feel. So we try to connect with people emotionally, but also do it in an honest and authentic way.
On that note, I feel like we should voice this person's tweet. Someone, Lenguarez, is saying, fear seems to be the ultimate political blackmail. I make you aware of the danger, and I, and only I, can protect you from. And, you're talking to the fact that a lot of people might be trying to instill fear in people that Obama's a socialist or a Muslim or whatever, or the fact that he's not born here. But we have someone else who's allegedly,
which is not a fact.
Which is not
he is
true.
Born
Let
here.
me clarify all that.
Yes.
You could go on Facebook. I think he posted his birth certificate. But Ben Lott says also that fear, he's agreeing, saying fear is a powerful motivator, and it's so true. And so I think he appreciates that you're voicing this loudly.
So I want to get you back into this, Eli, because so how do these things compare? I mean, fear is a powerful motivator, but maybe ignorance is too.
Well, ignorance isn't a motivator per se, because you don't know what you don't know, and it's hard to get excited about something that you don't know about. But the way that fear operates, I think, is that it dials up. It changes how you're willing to weight these different issues. So, for example, I think the Republicans in the early 2000s here in the U.S. did a great job of getting a whole bunch of people who knew that it was in their economic interest to vote for Democrats to override that with fear about terrorism, in a sense that the Republicans were going to be better on that. As it turned out, they weren't actually better, but that's sort of a side point. Fear is a way of adjusting the weight that people place on different preferences that they have. And one of the concerns, again, about sort of the social media is it's very easy for these sort of these things to spread very quickly before they can be fact-checked or before they can, because they're not going through any filters other than sort of social pass-along, you can get things retweeted and retweeted over and over and over again.
I want to get Ramesh to respond, because I think he's got some thoughts on this as well.
Actually, this is a question to both of you. What do you think a space or a world or a policy would look like which actually would allow people to come to the table with controversies, with disagreements with one another, rationally and critically debate those controversies? It could be a technology even, and actually come up with sort of consensus building that's based on controversy and dissension and discussion. What would that look like? Do we have any social media examples of that at all?
I personally, I heard you say that you didn't feel like Wikipedia was doing that. I do feel like it does
closest.
Some of that work, and if you go to the Wikipedia page for Barack Obama, this intensely sort of controversial subject, you get a very good view of at least sort of what are the controversies around him and where do they, which are the left-leaning ones, and I also think sites like Quora.com do a really nice job of, so Quora is a site where anyone can put a question on the site, and then lots of different people come together with an answer. And partly because of the community that's been built around it, people engage very sincerely. You get a very high quality of debate, and different perspectives.
So one project we're actually doing in India is trying to bridge the ways different citizens understand the world with the ways the governments do. Because citizens talk about their experiences and their grievances completely differently than the governments understand that. How do you bridge those understandings is a big part of these kinds of projects I think you're dealing with, both of you.
And I agree with you that the technology that actually does this hasn't yet really been built. I think that's one of the sort of most exciting grand challenges in computer science and engineering right now is, how do you build the network? How do you build the framework that allows people to really actually, have a democratic, decision-making experience that's good? it seems like figuring that out is one of. Hopefully, there's someone out there who's watching.
Who's trying to figure it out. Well, I got to thank you guys both for joining us and being a part of this conversation. We really appreciate you taking the time. Eli Pariser and Tara Dowdell, thank you again for coming into the stream.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to close out, Ahmed. I think you had a really interesting tweet, and then I want to switch topics real quick.
Yeah, this is just coming from Dicey Lee 808 again. She's saying the problem with a closed-minded internet, which is what we've been talking about, isn't caused by being online. It's just the fact that people find these niches for our diverging narratives, and then you kind of stick to it. So I guess it's human nature, and that speaks a bit to your India project.
The question really is who's at fault with this, right?
Yeah.
Is it a
where do we
technical
place
issue?
the blame?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Dave?
So there's a couple of things that I wanted to switch out. We could talk about democracy.
Yeah,
hours.
forever.
It's a big topic,
Years.
right? But I wanted to mention the fact that tomorrow we have a really, really interesting subject, and we have a very amazing guest, and he's a friend of mine. His name is Salman Ahmed. He is the founder of probably one of the most popular bands out of South Asia called Junoon. It's a Pakistani rock band, and he wrote a book last year that was called Rock and Roll Jihad. And he's got some really fascinating ideas. If you look at Ahmed's screen, he's got a clip of one of their videos. Let's take a listen real quick.
Yeah.
So basically, I mean...
it's worth mentioning, this is from the album Revolution, and they're often deemed the South Asian U2, is that correct?
Absolutely.
They're called, a lot of people think of them as the South Asian U2, and Salman is a really interesting guy because, I mean, this is a dude who is basically a practicing Muslim. He's a Sufi rock star, and this is in a country, Pakistan, where you've got, it's this conflict between what I heard from some people say is a traditional, more relaxed practice of Sufic Islam there, and what is becoming a more hardline Wahhabi-influenced practice. To give us a little bit more insight into what's happening in Pakistan, I want to talk to our Skype guest, Bina Sarwar. She's an editor at amankiasha.com. It's an organization, or actually a journalistic outlet that helps to bridge the gap between Indians and Pakistanis and the information that they have. Bina, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, wonderful. Your Skype is frozen, but we can hear your audio clearly. Okay. So I'm just wondering if you could speak a little to this issue. Am I correct in saying that there seems to be a conflict between more accommodating or traditional forms of Sufi-influenced Islam in Pakistan and more hardline elements?
Well, yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely true. There is absolutely that conflict in Pakistan right now. And as you mentioned, Salman Ahmed is one of the people that personifies one part of that conflict.
Okay, and so how does this actually play out on the ground in Pakistan? Because, we've been hearing a lot of talk in the international media since the killing of Osama bin Laden that, maybe somebody in Pakistan, whether government officials or ISI intelligence figures, someone must have known that he was there. Are these guys truly partners in peace? I mean, how do people on the ground in Pakistan see these issues? On the one hand, combating things like terrorism. On the other hand, having sovereignty that can't be violated by people coming in to take out the folks they don't like.
Right. Well, about sovereignty, the thing is that Osama bin Laden also was not a Pakistani national, right? So his being there, he was also, his being there was a violation of Pakistan's sovereignty, if you're going to take that line.
But it's interesting that the Pakistani government didn't say that in their response. They talked about how the U.S. violated their sovereignty, but said nothing about whether bin Laden had a visa.
No, they did. I heard Ambassador Hussein Haqqani in Washington said that, not once, several times. I haven't heard everything that all the officials in Pakistan said, but the Pakistan government did make that point. But what you hear voices amplified from the media, which doesn't pick up what I think is a more sensible view. And so you get to hear one point of view, but you don't hear a more maybe responsible view that doesn't get amplified so much. And as far as sovereignty is concerned, I think maybe what I'm going to say might be a bit provocative. But the thing is, if he was there for that long, and I agree with you, there's no way that he could have been there for that long without somebody somewhere in in the Pakistan government, or not necessarily in the government, the elected government, but somebody in the establishment knowing that he was there. And if after 5 years the people responsible couldn't didn't hand him in, if the U.S. came and did that, then I'm sorry, that's just the way it is.
Bina, I want to thank you for taking the time to give us a little bit of a scope of what's happening on the ground. We really appreciate you joining us. For those who have joined us online, thanks again for watching. Tomorrow we will be speaking with Salman Ahmed about the situation on the ground in Pakistan and how it's affecting young people there. If you have any questions for Salman, tweet us at AJStream. We will present your questions to him. We will see you again tomorrow.